just some guy got diarrhea and just shot himself to death or something. Like, just, back then, like, I mean, you could probably catch a common cold and that could be the end of it. So
you could catch a common cold and shit yourself to death as well.
You could, there's lots of worse ways to go. Hello everyone and welcome to the Council of Elrond, your weekly podcast on all things Lord of the Rings and Professor Tolkien. On the podcast today, we're going to be talking about the Kings of Gondor and how their line was broken. We'll also look at a very cool and interesting story from the appendices from the Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. And I'm joined as usual by my brother and co-host Dave. Welcome Dave, how are you doing? How are you getting on?
Good now. It's good to be back. This is our first time recording separately again, so it's kind of sad.
Do you miss
sad
me?
Times. Yeah, miss your touch.
Exactly.
Miss your musk.
Miss your smell. So we're back to reality now, back to our normal ways of podcasting remotely, which is less fun, I suppose, but you do what you gotta do. And as always, guys, please check out our socials. Any of our links are in our podcast description. Go check out our YouTube channel and our Patreon, and thanks to all of our members there, and a special thanks to Jack Knightley. But let's get into today's podcast.
The line of kings failed. The white tree withered. The rule of Gondor was given over to lesser men.
So, today's podcast, as I said, we're going to be talking about the Kings of Gondor, the old kings, and all these types of things. But what I want to start off with is, I'm sure most people here will have seen the recent Rings of Power series, and maybe you have heard the whole ordeal or the whole malarkey about what's going on with the rights or what went on with the rights. And I think a lot of us figured out that they were going to be using the notes from the appendices from the Lord of the Rings. They didn't have the rights to Silmarillion, they didn't have rights to certain books, so they were going to be getting all of their Second Age info from the appendices. So I wanted to remind myself what stories they could possibly tell. So this is back before the series started. I went back, I dug out my copy of The Return of the King, and I went back and I read the appendices, which I hadn't read for ages. So there were plenty of interesting stories there that I had completely forgotten about. But I'd like to start by asking you, Dave, what information do you have about the Kings of Gondor? Do you know anything about from the Lord of the Rings, from either the books or the movies? What can you tell me about them?
Sure, that's why I'm here in this podcast, to learn from you. What do you want to know about them?
Just very basic things. What do we know about the Kings of Gondor, for example?
Right, well, we have Aragorn, who would be the most recent king, and there hasn't been a king for many an era before Aragorn was around, and
sure,
before him,
and why not?
Because that line was broken.
All right, okay. Are you sure the blade wasn't broken? The line was broken. Yeah.
No, the line of kings was broken, so there just hasn't been kings in Gondor for a long, long time. So it's been ruled by the Stewards of Gondor, I suppose, and they were the protectors of the throne, and they were kind of the acting rulers of Gondor and Arnor.
Very good, well done. Yes, okay.
Yeah. So who would have been the last king before that? I believe it would have had to have been. Was it Isildur? Was the last king before Aragorn?
No.
All right, okay. No, that was way off. Right,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so Isildur would have been basically one of the first king, I suppose.
Oh, right, okay.
Because they founded. Anyway, we'll get into that.
That's right. Yeah.
So it was he. So Aragorn does come. He is a descendant of Isildur. But don't worry, we'll get into all that stuff. And by the end of this podcast, hopefully, you'll all be experts on this whole area. So now, if you just watch the Lord of the Rings movies, for example, you'll probably figure out that the line of kings was broken at some point, and that the Stewards had taken over, and we get to see Denethor II in the movies, and he does a great John Noble, is that his name? Mm-hmm. He does a fantastic job representing, a type of Denethor. I really enjoyed his performance, at least. Yeah. But we don't really learn too much more. So how, or when did the kings stop ruling, and why did the Stewards take over, and what happened to all the kings? And these are questions that need answering.
Questions.
Basically. So
Riddles in the dark.
Riddles in the dark. So one of the stories from the appendices explains exactly how the line of the kings ended. And I'm going to tell you a little story about the last king of Gondor, who was a guy called King Arnor. And so we're going to have a little bit of a story time today. And for dramatic effect, I'm going to start at the end of the story and tell you all about King Arnor's demise and how he met his doom. So
nice. So it's going to be like flashback to 5 months earlier. That
Exactly. It's good.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna. I don't know what kind of movie directors are famous for shooting in this type of style, but there's a lot of them out there. But because I remember when I was reading, I was on a plane months ago reading through the appendices of Lord of the Rings, and I was exhausted, and I was just tired, and I was reading this story, and it was one of those times where you're reading something and just the information is not really going in, and then I remember I came to the end of the story about him. And something really caught my attention. I was like, whoa, hang on a minute. I need to go back and read all of this again. Because we find out that he eventually died because he marched on Minas Morgul with a very small company. And he took on the Witch King in 1-to-1 combat. And then after that, we don't actually hear too much about how it ended. But basically, him and his company were never seen again. So I remember just being like, that's a pretty badass way to go. I mean, if you're going to be the king and you just decide that you're going to march up to the Witch King. So the Witch King had sent him a challenge to single combat, and he accepted the challenge, and he rode off with his Kingsguard to take on the most evil and most feared, one of the most evil and fear-invoking beings ever to stain Middle-earth, I suppose. So I thought that was really, really cool. Now, we don't actually, as I said, we don't get too many details, unfortunately. So it's unknown if he actually fought the Witch King in a fair trial or if there was possibly some foul play involved. Like, I mean, after all, it was the Witch King we're talking about. So he could have ambushed the king upon his arrival or cheated in any sort of a way. All that we know is that they were never seen again, the king and his company. So we can assume that this King Arnor was a total badass and completely fearless. If he was brave enough to challenge or to take on this challenge against the Witch King. So it's a pretty cool way for the line of the kings to be broken. I'm sure you'd agree. And I mean, at least it was broken in this like honorable and courageous way. I mean, can you imagine they were like, how did the Lion Kings break? And it was like, oh, just some guy got diarrhea, just shot himself to death or something. Like, just, back then, like, I mean, you could probably catch a common cold and that could be the end of it. So
you could catch a common cold and shit yourself to death as well.
You could, there's lots of worse ways to go. So
that was like how people, that was like natural causes back then, just shitting yourself to death.
Oh, yeah. It was just like, it was a bit ruddy today. I think I'll better get my affairs in order. So it's also pretty cool when you think about it that like the Witch King, he's this guy that we meet in the Lord of the Rings, and he's trying to stop the return of the king. He's trying to stop Aragorn returning as king, and he is the one who broke that line centuries before. Like I think it's like 800, no more than that, like a couple of thousand years before. He's the same dude. So
wow, yeah.
It's cool. And a little side note is that we're also going to learn a little bit more about the Witch King today. So kind of like his origin story. Well, maybe not his origin story, but like, So
this is like modern filmmaking where we have the like
little side plot.
End of the movie, and then we have like the 5 months earlier or 800 years earlier or whatever. And now we're having also like a prequel with the Witch King and his origin story.
A bit of a prequel.
Like, how he became the Witch King.
Not exactly his origin story.
Was he bitten by a witch?
It's more like before he was the leading member of the Ringwraiths, the famous group that we see. Like, it's kind of like seeing him off on his own, like a young Witch King just doing his thing. Kind of like, imagine if you're in the the 60s and you're listening to the Rat Pack and you're like, geez, these guys are good. Who's this guy Frank Sinatra? And people are like, whoa, he had a whole career before. Like, you need to go and check out his earlier stuff. And it's like, whoa.
Are you going to make me really like the Witch King though? Is it going to be one of those things where it's like, I'm going to feel emotions for the bad guy?
No, you're just going to you're just going to think he was, it's just going to build on already what we know about him and expand his, flesh out his story a little bit, I suppose, even though he had no flesh. But anyway.
Feast on his flesh.
So who was this dude, King Arnor, I suppose that's the question. And how did all this lead to the Stewards taking over the rule of Gondor? Well, in order to get to that, we should first explain a couple of things about the kingdoms of Gondor and, as you rightly said, and Arnor. a lot of people don't know from just watching the movies, for example, a lot of people don't know much about the Kingdom of Arnor at all, and it's just Gondor is the main focus. So how were these kingdoms created and by whom, Dave? If I throw that question over to you.
Okay, so yeah, I was completely wrong saying Isildur. Isildur started the line of kings in Gondor, and his brother started them in Arnor? No?
You're very
Okay,
close. You're close. What about
I know we have Minas Ithil and Minas Arnor, which is like,
Anor, yes. Also,
Anor, sorry.
so there's Minas Ithil and there's Minas Anor, and Minas Anor sounds very much like Arnor.
Yeah.
So that's a little
It's
bit
very
confusing.
confusing.
As well. Yes.
So
And-
Minas Ithil was like Isildur's home at first, because that is like what is Minas? Tower of the Moon, which is like Isildur's name.
Sure.
And then Minas Anor is like Tower of the Sun, which would be like Anarion, and his name means son of sun or something like that, right?
He is son of sun.
Yes,
Yeah,
son of sun and son of the moon, which would be Anarion and Isildur. So yeah. So what was the question again?
Right. I'll clear that stuff up again anyway in a minute or two. But basically, who was the king before Isildur, Dave? I suppose that might help you.
I assume his father, Elendil.
So what did he found?
Oh God. Yeah, so they all basically escaped from Numenor when it was being destroyed, and well, one of them found Gondor and the other found Arnor. So I don't know which one was which.
Yeah, so basically Arnor, the kingdom of Arnor, was probably the greater of the two initially, and that was founded by Elendil, who was
Right.
the High King, and that was at the
And that's
end
like in
of
the
the
top
Second Age.
left.
Yes, exactly. That's up northwest. So, and then also Anarion and Elendil, the two sons, they together they founded Gondor, and
Anarion and
Gondor.
Isildur, you mean?
Yeah. What did I say?
Elendil.
Oh, sorry. So Isildur and Anarion, the two brothers, Isildur being the elder, founded Gondor, and Gondor was ruled jointly by both of these guys, by both Isildur and Anarion. But
Yeah.
Elendil, as the High King, he was still the ruler of both regions, and he ruled from Arnor in the north. So
Cool.
kind of like being, the High King, and then being like lower level kings, or being kind of like, I don't know, prime ministers or something there of Gondor. And it's cool if you look at the map, you'll see that. What was the old capital of Gondor, Dave? Do you remember?
The old capital was it Osgiliath?
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah,
You've got
okay.
Osgiliath.
That was where the kings resided, basically.
Yeah, so what happened was, if you look at the map, you'll see Osgiliath is at one point, and then on either side, both sides, there's these other little small cities. One of them was, as you rightly said, Minas Ithil and Minas Anor. And that's where Isildur and Anarion lived. They each lived in one of these cities, and then they would come to Osgiliath, and in the main hall, there were two thrones sitting beside each other, one representing Minas Ithil and one representing Minas Anor. And so they would both sit there, and they would, just carry out their kingly duties. They'd go there for, press conferences and, things like that. Like chair meetings and board meetings. And stuff.
Interviews with Piers Morgan.
Yeah, they were like, come on, okay, we've got our press duties, we've got our media stuff going on. So that's what they would do there. So Arnor, as you said as well, was up north and northwest, and it was situated beside the elven kingdom of Lindon. So Elendil would have had dealings with Gil-galad, as he was an elf friend. And it was a very expansive kingdom, however. It stretched all the way from the Grey Havens on the coast over to near Rivendell. So just for reference as well, the Shire was like smack bang in the middle of Arnor. So if you think of the typical map, you'll see Mordor in the bottom right corner in the southeast and Lindon up in the northwest. So Arnor is just to the right of Lindon, and Gondor is just to the left of Mordor down in the south. And the northern borders of Arnor, so it's up there near the north, and its northern borders are bordering Angmar, which is famous for what reason?
For the Witch King. This
Exactly.
is where he's from,
His full title is the Witch King of Angmar.
Of Angmar.
And so we know that that's not the most pleasant of places as well. It's a bit of a spooky spot, I suppose.
Yeah,
it's kind of like the Elephant Graveyard from The Lion King,
Yeah.
Very scary. So
That's exactly how I would imagine it, actually.
Exactly. So anyway, Isildur becomes the king of both Gondor and Arnor after the death of his father in the Battle of the Last Alliance, and also his brother Anarion also dies in the same battle. And he intended to return to Arnor in the north and to leave Anarion's son Meneldil to rule Gondor in the south. After he kind of mentored him for a long period of time, he was like, "Look, you take over Gondor. I'll go back to Arnor and I'll do what my father did." And I'll rule both from there, and you can kind of just be like kind of my, sub-ruler there. And we see that in the Fellowship of the Ring, Isildur gets attacked by orcs, and that leads to his death. This actually happened when Isildur was leaving Gondor, and he was heading to Arnor to rule from there.
Yeah.
And he had 3 sons who were with him, and 2 of his sons were killed in this attack as well. So then Isildur's youngest son, Valandil, he escaped with his life, and he became the High King of Arnor. But he didn't claim the kingship of Gondor, and the 2 kingdoms became separated at that point. So Gondor continued to be ruled by the heirs of Anarion, and Arnor was ruled by the heirs of Isildur. And that's quite important that they kind of get separated in that way. So Isildur and Anarion, then they kind of, Isildur, all of his line, then they go off in Arnor. That is the Northern Kingdom, and it ends up kind of falling to ruin. That's where we get the Dunedain. And then Anarion, he's got the line where all the kings of Gondor come from. So all those big kings that we're going to hear about, and these couple that we will hear about today, they come from Anarion's line. So seeing as Valandil and his heirs did not claim the throne of Gondor, the realms were split, but Arnor's ruler kept the title of High King, whereas the ruler in the south was known as just King. So there was still a small distinction between King and High King, but anyway. And just a small other note from the Lord of the Rings fandom.com of what happened to Arnor. It says here, after 800 years of peace, High King Earendur died in the Third Age 861, and his 3 squabbling sons divided the realm into 3 kingdoms of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudar. The eldest son, Amlaeth, his name was, claimed kingship over all Arnor, but was reduced to only ruling the region of Arthedain as his kingdom, while the other sons founded kingdoms in Cardolan and Rudar. Thereafter, the Dunedain of the north spent their strength in foolish petty wars, sapping their strength while enemies gathered in the shadows. So another note on what happened to the Dunedain. They were these like great men in the north, and their realm, Arnor, was eventually split into 3. The greatest of them was called Arthedain, and then there was loads of these like internal wars, civil wars, and basically it says here that they were just like kind of petty wars, it calls them here. So just something interesting there as well, like when you're kind of going, how did they just kind of fall apart? Well, that was one of the reasons.
Yeah,
so
just like kept dividing, getting smaller and smaller, and
yeah. Well, that was it. Got to those small 3, and then eventually just the whole thing gets taken over by someone that we'll see in a moment. I think you already know.
Fool! No man can kill me.
But anyway, we know that Elendil perishes in the Battle of the Last Alliance, and we know that Isildur becomes king, and Isildur is famous in the Lord of the Rings for being the one who didn't destroy the One Ring. But we also know that Aragorn is a descendant of this family and heir to the King of Gondor. The Kingdom of Gondor and Arnor. But what is the relationship between Aragorn and Isildur, and how does King Eanor fit into this whole story? And if the line was broken, how was it unbroken, I suppose? So, any clue on that, Dave?
Oh, that wasn't rhetorical.
Well, I mean, I'm assuming you don't know, so it probably was.
What do you mean, what's the relation? Is he not just a descendant? Like, literally, the son of a son of a son of a son of a son that comes from Isildur?
Well, it's never that simple in these types of things, I suppose. But anyway, yeah, it's a difficult question. So it's easier if I just kind of take the reins and explain what's going on here. So we're going to have a bit of a story time here now. And as I told you, I'm going to talk to you about this guy called King Eanor. So he was born in 1928 of the Third Age in Gondor. And at that time, Gondor was recovering from a great plague. So they were not at their strongest point of power. The Kingdom of Arnor had also now been split into its 3 provinces that we know of, and it was constantly under attack from the Witch King. And he had already taken control of two of the provinces, leaving only one remaining, which was Arthedain, which was the main one, and it was also the furthest north. It was also bordering Angmar. So the Witch King, basically, he was really trying to take over all of Arnor, and he only had one small province left to take over. Now, if you've heard our podcast all about the Dead Marshes from a long time ago, you're going to hear a story that we mentioned in that podcast. And if you haven't, you can go back and check that one out. We just have a shameless plug for our own podcast. That was a good episode. But so in that episode, we talk about, so in 1944 of the Third Age, I know that some people don't like dates, but I'm going to give them. When Arnor was 16 years old, Gondor gets attacked by both Easterlings and Haradrim at the same time. The Haradrim come from the south, while these Wain Riders, they were called, basically just Easterlings on chariots, they attack from the east. And the king, who is known as King Ondahur, takes an army and goes to battle against the Easterlings, while sending Eärnor's father, the general Eärnil II, to combat the Haradrim in the south. Now this general Eärnil, Eärnor's father, he defeats the Haradrim and makes his way with his army back north to find that the Easterlings have slaughtered all the Gondorian army, including the king and his sons, all dead and all in the marshes. And when he comes upon the Easterlings, Eärnil battles with them and defeats them as well, leaving their bodies in the Dead Marshes as well, along with the Gondorians. And this body count was only adding to the great number of the dead who had already fallen there in the Battle of the Last Alliance. And that had happened almost 2,000 years prior, leaving men, elves, orcs, dwarves, etc., all dead in the marshes. And we kind of go into that in a bit more detail in another episode. So that's why in the movies, when we see the Dead Marshes, there's so many just faces and dead things. Dead faces in the water.
Dead. All rotten.
Very good. So who was this dude now? This General Eärnil II. He was the great-great-grandson of a Gondorian king called King Telummatar. So he was on a noble line, but he was never in line for the throne. He was like a distant relations. So imagine like the royal family now. Imagine like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Imagine they have like children, and then they have children, and their like distant grandson eventually becomes the king because all of like William's line are just all slaughtered. And it's like, they're like, oh, he was never really going to be in line. He was like 42nd in line to the throne. But that's kind of how this guy was related. So he was a descendant of Anarion. Remember, Anarion was the guy in Gondor, while Isildur was in Arnor. So after the king and his sons were killed in this battle in the marshes, there was a lot of debate with what to do with the empty throne, and another distant relative made a claim for the throne. This guy called Arvedui. He was a king over in Arnor, and he wasn't the king of Arnor because Arnor had been split. So he was just a king in Arnor.
One of the three.
Well, two of the three had already been taken over as well, though. So he was the only one remaining. So he made a claim for the throne as he was a distant relative of Isildur, but the men refused. The men of Gondor appointed General Eärnil, who was a descendant of Anarion, as the king instead, because again, Isildur and Anarion, this was split, had happened now. So they said he should be the king because he was noble line and related to Anarion instead of Isildur. So now this lad Eärnil, he was pure sound, like he was spot on. And the text says that he was a quote wise man and not arrogant. And he sent a message to Arvedui, the other guy who made the claim, and he announced that he had received the crown, but he said, quote, I do not forget the royalty of Arnor, nor deny our kinship, nor wish that the realms of Elendil should be estranged. I will send to your aid when you have need, as far as I am able. So he was spot on, like he's just a really nice guy. And so now when his father, when Eärnor, remember his father was the king now, when he was 45 years old, the Witch King was ready to make his final attack on Arnor and to take its last remaining province of Arthedain. And they sent a message to Gondor pleading for help from King Eärnil, who decided to send Eärnor, his son, with a huge fleet to rally against the Witch King. However, it was too late, and the Witch King had already conquered Arthedain and killed the king before Eärnor arrived at the Grey Havens in Lindon. So they took ships from Gondor all the way around, and they arrived up at Lindon. But the book says that when Eärnor arrived at the Grey Havens, there was joy and wonder from both men and elves at the size of the army he brought. However, there's also a line later speaking about the people in the north marveling at the army that says, quote, or so it seemed to the people of the north. but this was a small sending force of the whole might of Gondor. So
Nice.
we're getting an idea of how mighty Gondor was as well. It's just a small sending fleet, and everyone's like, oh, like all these elves and like all these people up there are like, oh my god, this is insane. So that was cool. Also, we get this other new character. Well, not a new character, a character that we know, but he pops up. So Círdan, he is now the leader of Lindon because, again, Gil-galad is no longer the leader. He also dies in the Battle of the Last Alliance. So Círdan gathers his own army of elves and they team up with Eärnor's army and they gather all the strength and they get ready to march on the north and on the Witch King, who has taken up residence in an old city in Arthedain. Remember that Arthedain, this place is up near Angmar. So this host of men and elves, they move east through Arnor, just killing any orc armies and enemies who stood in the way. And before we go any further, we're just going to get a little note on Eärnor, and it says in the appendix that Eärnor was, quote, Eärnor was a man like his father in valor, but not in wisdom. He was a man of strong body and hot mood, but he would take no wife, for his only pleasure was in fighting or in the exercise of arms. So that's just to get a little note on his character. So
sounds like Eärnor was in the closet and he was not very wise.
Not very wise. He was like, I don't want a wife because I just love fighting. So
I love killing things.
Yeah. So now I'm going to get out my book and we're going to have a bit of a story time. So I'm going to read to you guys a little bit. So in his pride, we're speaking now here about where just after the whole armies together with Círdan and Eärnor, they were marching on the Witch King and they finally arrive at the place where they find that the Witch King he's holding up in this little area in the north. And it says, talking about the Witch King, in his pride, he did not await the onset of his enemies in his stronghold, but went out to meet them, thinking to sweep them as others before into the Lune. The Lune was this river. But the host of the west came down on him, and there was a great battle. The forces of Angmar were already giving way and retreating when the main body of the horsemen that had passed round the hills came down from the north and scattered them in a great rout. Then the Witch King, with all that he could gather from the wreck, fled northwards, seeking his own land of Angmar. Before he could gain shelter of the Carn Dum, the cavalry of Gondor overtook him, with Eärnor riding at their head. At the same time, a force under Glorfindel, remember him, the elf lord, came out of Rivendell. Then so utterly was Angmar defeated that not a man nor an orc of that realm remained west of the mountains. So, as I said, Círdan got his army of elves together. They joined this giant fleet of these Gondorians. And then suddenly Glorfindel comes out of Rivendell with another army as well. So that's like 3 armies together, all joined together, and they were taking on the Witch King. And so they fairly smashed them. And it says there that basically no orcs or any sort of evil were left west of the mountains.
I love the way Tolkien does that all the time with things. I kind of expected you to say, and there was never an orc in Angmar again, but I was like, that probably wouldn't make sense because Angmar does have lots of evil further on the timeline, I presume. But he
really.
usually does.
This is basically, we're going to see the end of Angmar here, pretty much.
Right. Okay, but like that's how he kind of finishes every sort of battle or any sort of thing. It's like, and there was never a whisper of him talked about again, or there was never an orc to the west side of the Misty Mountains ever again. You're like, really?
Yeah, he just talks about different places as well. That you like the Lune and Carn Dum as well. You're like, where the hell are these places? You could just give me a simple answer. But anyway,
the Loom or the Loon?
Lune with an N,
Loon.
So I'm going to continue on here, and it says, but it is said that when all was lost, suddenly the Witch King himself appeared, black-robed and black-masked, upon a black horse. Fear fell upon all who beheld him, but he singled out the captain of Gondor for the fullness of his hatred, and with a terrible cry he rode straight upon him. Eärnor would have withstood him, but his horse could not endure that onset, and it swerved and bore him far away before he could master it. So the Witch King steps out, all dressed up in black, charges at Eärnor and charges at the men. Everyone's terrified. And it says Eärnor would have withstood him, meaning he would have at least stood his ground. Not saying that he would have defeated him, but his horse just was too terrified. So remember, it's the Witch King. Like, it's like the dog that we see in the Fellowship of the Ring when he sees one of the ring wraiths just being absolutely terrified. So then the Witch King laughed, and none that heard it ever forgot the horror of that cry. But Glorfindel rode up then on his white horse, and in the midst of his laughter, the Witch King turned to flight and passed into the shadows. Eärnor now rode back, but Glorfindel, said, quote, "Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." These words were remembered, but Éonair was angry, desiring only to be avenged for his disgrace. So ended the evil realm of Angmar, and so did Éonair, captain of Gondor, earn the chief hatred of the Witch King, but many years were still to pass before that was revealed. So there you go. That's like the start.
Is that the beginning of the prophecy?
It's the beginning of the hatred of Éonair, of the Witch King for Éonair, and vice versa. So Éonair, remember, he was a very proud man, and he saw this thing of like, it says he would have withstood him, but his horse ran away. But like basically, what it looked like was he just fled, and he was terrified. So it looked like he was a coward. And he was, you
could always blame it on the horse then, whenever you're like afraid.
Yeah, oh, the horse.
It was the horse. Oh, no.
Yeah. I was trying to stop.
It were my legs. My legs were terrified. I wanted to fight you.
So,
but also, like, that is that the first time there's any mention of this kind of prophecy of where the Witch King says, "No man can kill me," and
I don't know if that's the first time. I don't know if that's the first time, but it is interesting that we see that there as well, because we know that it says that no man, he will not be killed by man or whatever. So it says there, and not by the hand of man will he fall. So yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I always wonder, like, those things where, let's say Glorfindel was the first person to like predict that, or it's almost like he saw the future and he's like, oh, it won't be a man, like technically it'll be a woman. Is that like what he predicted, and then did the Witch King like catch wind of this and be like, well, I know no man can kill me, so like he can just go into any battle and be like, well, no man can kill me, but it's actually because a specific person killed him. Like maybe if it was a man, you could say, well, no blonde-haired man will ever kill the Witch King. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do wonder about that kind of thing, and I wonder. So you're saying this isn't the first time that it was?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think so. I think it might have been predicted at another point before, but I'm not too sure. I don't have the answer to that now. So that's another topic for a different episode,
for another
podcast.
tale.
Yeah, another time. So I'm going to keep reading because I could talk to you guys, but I think if you actually read the text, it's going to be even more interesting to find out exactly what happens next. So then we find out that the Witch King, escaping from the north, he came to Mordor, and there he gathered the other ringwraiths, and it says of whom he was the chief. But it was not until the year 2000, that they issued from Mordor, and they laid siege to Minas Ithil. This they took in 2002 and captured the Palantir of the tower. And it says Minas Ithil became a place of fear and was renamed Minas Morgul. So we spoke about that earlier with Minas Ithil becomes Minas Morgul.
So what does Minas Morgul mean again? Tower of what? Do you know?
Do you remember?
I forget.
Oh, right, okay.
Is it Tower of Death? I don't know. Morgul.
Death or Dread or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, is it Dread? Yeah. Could be. I don't know.
We'll have to check it now later on. You look it up there while I'm reading this.
Yeah.
So, well, you should be reading and paying attention, I suppose.
I am paying attention.
Okay, good. So now we heard that quote about Éonair earlier being like his father in valor but not in wisdom, and that he was strong and he didn't take a wife and his pleasure was in fighting. It also says that his prowess was such that none in Gondor could stand against him in those weapon sports in which he delighted, seeming rather like a champion than a king or a captain. So he's just like unbelievable with swords and spears and stuff like that, and he's not really kingly in his more like knowledge and just that sort of way. So when Éonair received the crown in 2043, I think his father died at like the age of 160 or something like that, and he receives the crown. The king of Minas Morgul, the Witch King, challenged him to single combat, taunting him that he had not dared to stand before him in the Battle of the North. So he's kind of like just saying, oh, you were a coward, you ran away, come on, now you're the king, you can come and face me one-on-one. And it says that for that time, Mardil, the steward, restrained the wrath of the king. So he had his steward, and his steward like kind of talked some sense into him and was like, look, don't do it. And it says here, Minas Arnor, which had become the chief city of the realm since the days of King Telmanar, and the residence of the kings, was now renamed Minas Tirith. So Osgiliath had now been left as the main place, and now is Minas Arnor, and then it became known as Minas Tirith. And now, then it says, Éonair had held the crown only 7 years when the Lord of Morgul repeated his challenge, taunting the king that to the faint heart of his youth, he had now added the weakness of age. So he was like, all right, so we know you're a little bitch and that you were just like too scared to come. And now you're getting
you're an
old
old
and
bitch.
weak. Yeah, he's just really getting at him. And it says here, then Mardil, the steward, could no longer restrain him. And he rode with a small escort of knights to the gate of Minas Morgul. None of that riding were ever heard of again. It was believed in Gondor that the faithless enemy had trapped the king and that he had died in torment in Minas Morgul. So there we go. It says, now this is believed in Gondor. We don't really know. It says it's believed in Gondor that the faithless enemy had trapped the king. So they kind of believe that he was, kind of set upon by maybe the Witch King and other people. He was besieged, I suppose, and all that kind of stuff. And it also goes on to say, but since there were no witnesses of his death, Mardil, the good steward, ruled Gondor in his name for many years. Meaning that they didn't know if he had died or if he was still alive. So instead of passing the kingship on to another person and looking for a new king, they said, okay, well, the steward, you can take charge for the moment in his name. So he ruled in his stead.
The acting king, kind of like the hand of the king, just taking over while the king is absent.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, exactly like that. And then, so I nearly finished this reading part, but it says, the descendants of the king had become few. Their numbers had greatly diminished, and kings had become jealous and watchful of those near akin. Often those of whom suspicion fell had fled to Umbar, and there joined the rebels, while others had renounced their lineage and taken wives not of Númenórean blood. So lots of people that were noble or of noble lines, they were worried that like the kings that were becoming jealous of people taking their rule, they were like having people killed. Some people were fleeing the city and going to Umbar, which we hear of in the Lord of the Rings. We hear of the Corsairs of Umbar, those black sails. That was a city that there's a huge history of like war between there. The people like Gondor takes over Umbar, then it gets recaptured and all this kind of stuff. So there were lots of people going there, fleeing to Umbar and joining the rebels, it says. And it says, so it was that no claimant to the crown could be found who was of pure blood or whose claim would allow. And therefore the steward continued to rule Gondor, and the crown of Elendil lay in the lap of the king Eärnil in the house of the dead where Eanor had left it. So Eanor, before he left and went to battle with the Witch King, he took his crown and he placed it on the lap of his father in the houses of the dead, and that's where it remained until Aragorn picks it up like 1,000 years later. So
The crown. Is
the
that
crown.
what you said? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
So that's what happened to that. So that's basically it there. That's we don't even really know what happened behind these closed doors when he went to challenge the Witch King. So it's interesting to speculate about that as well. So what do you think? Do you think that the Witch King just ambushed him and killed him quickly? Do you think maybe they took him prisoner and taunted him or tortured him and maybe even experimented on him and tried to turn him into a wraith or like the mouth of Sauron or something like that, or maybe a newt? Or do you think that maybe the Witch King fought him in single combat, like honorably, and he probably had zero chance of losing anyway, and maybe he thought, if you're the Witch King, it might be cool to just dishonor this king even more by beating him fair and square. So what's your opinions on that? What do you think he would have done?
I think he would be the type to actually, I don't think he would have faced him one-on-one. I think he would have been more likely to try and embarrass and disgrace and dishonor him and like capture him. And by the way, I looked up there, the Morgul means sorcery, so Tower of Sorcery is what Minas Morgul is. So yeah, like you said there, maybe he experimented on him, so maybe this is another reason why it has this name. Maybe the Witch King was performing experiments on noble men of Gondor, and what more noble man than the king of Gondor at the time. So could have been cool to try and, who knows, maybe he is one of the wraiths. We don't. No, it couldn't be. He could be. No, it couldn't be.
Why not?
Could he be? Because they're
He's
like
a king. I mean, we know
they're-
that most of the wraiths are kings.
4 of them are Númenóreans, right?
3 of them are Númenóreans.
Three of them are Númenóreans, and we don't really know much about the others apart from there's an Easterling and there's
We know
Witch
there's
King.
we only know that there is an Easterling and
The other,
maybe 3
the
Númenóreans,
others,
one.
it doesn't say they're kings. It's only in Peter Jackson's film that says that.
No, but it says that
kings. It says
they're
lords.
It says that kings. It's basically said that they're either kind of kings or sort of witches or people that like had. I don't know, they had power anyway in their normal lives. They were in positions of power, so they could have been, like as you said,
I think
lords.
it says lords though. Yeah. Who knows?
We spoke about this in our episode on the ring rates and on the 9 rings
Nazgûl,
recently,
yeah.
and I can't remember. I think there were 3 words used, maybe like lords, kings, and witches, or something like that, or like I don't know, mages.
But maybe
what's the word that you use?
mage, yeah, mage would be like a wizard kind of type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I suppose wizards in Tolkien's world are Istari, and they would have to be Maiar. So maybe they have like mages that are just kind of like regular men with power. But yeah, anyways, I do think that, I don't know, I'd like to know more about the Witch King. Maybe it'd be cool to get to see an origin story or a prequel movie of him. And
Oh, it'd be so glad.
I know like it wouldn't be canonical really at all, but it'd just be cool to see someone's vision of him. Would he have been like the honorable character to challenge someone to a duel and beat them fair and square, or would he be someone to trick the King of Gondor and like capture him and like have him tortured and bet and mutilated? And who knows, he could still be in Minas Morgul to this day, being kept alive by a bunch of
by something unnatural.
Long life and unnatural.
Yeah. No, but it's cool. Like, I mean, and that would be so class to see if we got to see like I don't know, some sort of a short movie or a mini series or something about the Witch King of gallivanting around and, you know, just doing experiments on some of his kings that he's caught, or just different noblemen around the areas. He's like, oh, I've ensnared a new one. I'm going to carry out some experiments on him. And I think it's cool as well that he just uses these different things to taunt the king. He's like, oh, you're a coward, and now you're getting old. And these are things that were really, I mean, we heard about the character of this guy, Arnor, that he was very proud, and maybe he didn't have the knowledge and kind of the
wisdom.
I don't know, the wisdom, I suppose, of his father. And he was mainly just amazing as a fighter, and he was, you know, it says that none could stand with him in Middle Earth. Basically, he was the best fighter. He was just an absolute badass. And so it's kind of like he also knew how to get at him, because apart from that, these men, I mean, remember, these are people that come from Númenóreans, and we know that the Númenóreans, one of the things that really started to worry them was old age and the fear of death. And that's one of the reasons why Númenor gets destroyed, because they're trying to cheat death, really. They're trying to, you know, take on the Valar and say, look, we have the right to go live in the Undying Lands, because they mistakenly thought that if they went to live there, they would be undying, instead of it just being, that's the home of where the people that are undying live. So there was a lot of fear amongst the Númenóreans, and then thus the Gondorians, and a whole noble line of this getting older and death. And we'll see that, I'm sure, in the future seasons of the Rings of Power series with Pharazôn. I'm sure that's what we'll get to see play out, that he's going to start being terrified of getting old and dying and losing his powers, losing his strengths and his skills. So it was cool that the Witch King used that as his like method to taunt him as well. He'd be like, oh, now you're still a coward, and now you're even older and weaker. And he's like, oh, I mean, I don't know, so cunning, the Witch King.
Gets him right in his bloodline. He's like, no, my family. But also I think when the Númenóreans, the ones that managed to escape and fled to Middle Earth, I feel like they don't fear death as much as the Númenóreans, because they're all like, you know, into battles and war and stuff, and death is just like another way, or another part of life, I suppose. Actually, I've talked to you about the game. I used to have the Battle for Middle Earth and then Battle for Middle Earth 2, but there was an expansion pack for the second one called The Rise of Angmar, and that was really cool. And you get to play in Angmar, and do you get to fight the Witch King or play as the Witch King? It's been so long since I played it, but yeah, that was really cool. That's where I first got to learn some of the histories about the north of Middle Earth, and getting to see some extra characters there. I think you get to play as the Barrow Downs as well, or as the Barrow Whites.
Yeah,
and
I've never played those games. I really need to.
Oh, they're so good.
Give them a
It's
go.
like Age of Empires for Lord of the Rings, so it's good. It's good stuff.
That sounds deadly. I still have to complete the fucking, what you call it, the one that you gave me.
Rise of Mordor, or what's it called?
Shadow of Mordor?
Shadow of Mordor. Or Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor, yeah. You have the first one, don't you? I
have Shadow of Mordor.
Yeah.
I do, yeah. I nearly finished it ages ago, and then I kind of just stopped playing, and that's that day. That's
I haven't played PlayStation. I actually played FIFA there maybe 2 days ago for the first time in it's like a year. Like I remember playing it back when I started college, and I literally haven't touched it since. And I was like, oh, this feels so weird. And also, I took out both controls, and what the left analog on the control was all like wet and sticky, and I was like, ew, what the hell? So then I got the other one, and I was like, this one's also wet and sticky. So something must have happened during the heat wave that the left controller on like every analog stick just like melted or something.
Oh wow!
So yeah, it was really weird. Side note.
Well, there you go. Side note.
There you have it.
That's what the listeners come to hear. They're like, oh, I had to get through all that Lord of the Rings bollocks just to hear about this. What I really
anyone
came
else
here
have
for.
this problem? I really
came here for the PlayStation control.
The
story.
wet and sticky situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody else had a situation like that with their left analog on their PlayStation controller, please get in touch and tell Dave that it's okay. It happened to them too.
Yeah. I really
And
want to
on
know.
that bombshell.
On that bombshell, leave a like and subscribe.
Kings made tombs more splendid than the houses of the living, and counted the old names of their descent dearer than the names of their sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls, musing on heraldry, or in high cold towers asking questions of the stars. And so the people of Gondor fell into ruin. The line of kings failed. The White Tree withered. The rule of Gondor was given over to lesser men.
So that's it, guys. That'll do it for another episode of the Council of Elrond. And we really enjoyed going through this story in the appendices about a lesser known character from the Lord of the Rings, and also looking at the line of the kings of old. And we hope you had a laugh or two along the way and maybe learned something interesting. You never know. Dave's shaking his head. Probably not. Oh, no, he's nodding. Okay, good. And there's so much more. There's so much more that I just couldn't get into today because we don't have the time. Don't have time. So please get in touch and let us know if we missed out on anything that you would have included, or if you just want to say hello. And we'd really love to hear from you. So on any of our social medias, you can get in touch with us. You can find all of those in our podcast description or in the section below in YouTube. And you can also find there any links to support us. You can buy us a coffee, or you can become a member of our Patreon. And that's really the best way to support us. You can also watch or listen to us anywhere that you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And don't forget to please leave a like and subscribe there and leave us a comment. Tell us what you think about everything, or just tell us how you're feeling. And we'd love to hear about you. So a big thank you to our members there already, and a huge shout out to Jack Knightley. So that's it for this week, guys. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.